From the St. Francis Yacht Club in San Francisco, this is the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, hosted by Ron Young.
Welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon, live from the virtual grill room of the St. Francis Yacht Club. We hope that you and yours are safe, sheltering in place in a comfortable environment, and we look forward to greeting you back at the Yacht Club just as soon as conditions permit. What you do creates who you are, and our speaker today exemplifies that. So please welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon our guest today, a CEO of North Technology Group, Tom Whidden. Tom, welcome to the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.
Thanks, Ron. You and I go back a long ways, so it's always an honor to speak with you and to be involved with one of the best yacht clubs that I've ever been to. Where else can you stand in the dining area and see boats? It feels like 20 feet away, you tell me, but I'm sure I have been 20 feet away from that window, racing up and down the shore, trying to get out of the current.
Tell us, what was the very first time you ever got on a boat? How old were you? Where was it? And what kind of boat was it?
So my dad was a madman and commuted to New York from Westport, Connecticut. And the yacht club in Westport, Connecticut was called the Cedar Point Yacht Club. At 10 years old, I sailed a Blue Jay and a boat called a Super Sprite in the sailing program there. And there were two sailing instructors that really motivated me to be as interested in sailing as I am. There was a great-looking girl named Wilson Lineberg and a great-looking guy named Lee Demarest, and I wanted to grow up just like them. So I don't know if it was the sailing or how Wilson looked or me just wanting to be like them, but I fell in love with it right away.
And if I ask you to give me some milestones between then and when you won the America's Cup for the first time with Dennis Conner in 1980, give me a couple of milestones.
You know, as a young sailor, I participated in the junior championships and in the Lightning championships and all that. But when I was 16, I taught sailing on Cape Cod, a yacht club called the WYL Yacht Club. Ran into a really nice guy named Jack Fallon. He took me under his wing, taught me a lot about how he looked at sailing and how he did such a good job of sailing. He dragged me along one time to go sailing with Ted Hood and Don McNamara and he on the 12-meter Nefertiti. I came along, they put me on the grinder right away, figuring I couldn't do anything else. And Don McNamara, who was known to raise his voice once in a while, yelled at me the whole day. But I was so impressed and so in awe. And to meet Ted Hood and to see what he did, that sort of whetted my whistle for wanting to be a sailmaker. When I was 19 or 20 or so, I bought a fin dinghy, and I actually tried for the Olympics when I got out of college. I went to Colby College. So that was sort of a milestone. And then I became a sailmaker right after that. And I bought a company along with a partner named Saab Sales. And I was off and running. I learned quickly that you weren't going to make a living selling fin sails at $165 a pop. So I started getting involved in larger boats, and luckily in 1979, I ran into Dennis Conner.
What year did you buy Saab?
In 1972. I was 23 years old, which I sure dating myself a little bit, but that was it.
So talk to us about that first time DC accosts you and says you're beating him.
That's a fun story. So at the SORC in 1979, we had finished the first two races. One was off the shores of St. Pete and Tampa, and then you do the St. Pete to Fort Lauderdale race. And after the first two races, I was actually beating Dennis, who was on a boat called Willowa. And he came up to me in Director's Yacht Yard. And he comes up to me and he says, "Hi, I'm Dennis Conner." And I said, "Hey, Dennis, I know who you are, and I've been racing you all week." And he said, "Well, that's what I wanted to talk to you about. You're beating me." And I said, "Well, yeah, I've been lucky so far, but still quite a ways to go." And he said to me, "Where are you headed?" And I said, "I'm going back to see my family in Connecticut and to spend a week at the business." And he said to me, "Good, I'll come with you." And I said, "Hey, Dennis, don't you live in San Diego?" And he said, "Yup." And I said, "Where are you headed?" And he says, "San Diego." So I said, well, Connecticut's not exactly on the way. And he said, no problem. We got in the plane. He told me all about his America's Cup campaign, and he asked me to be his trial skipper. That's how it all started.
That's great. So you guys start sailing. He has a very, very impressive campaign. He doesn't believe in leaving anything to chance. Talk a little bit about sailing with the famous and the powerful DC. He had a heck of a reign, and you were part of that whole reign.
Well, we had a wonderful summer, sailing the boats. And the first day I went sailing against him, actually, he sent me to Newport a month before he got there. I tuned up Enterprise, which was going to be the trial horse. And then when Freedom was finished, he was busy, so he sent it up to Newport, and I set up Freedom, got it all tuned up, got the crew going, even went sailing with Olin Stevens, which was intimidating at first, but a lot of fun. So the first day that we went sailing against each other, I had to, against Dennis, he took Enterprise. I was late coming because I'd been in an overnight race. I came up the next morning and I got to Newport about 10 in the morning, assuming that he would have left Enterprise, the trial horse, for me, and he would have taken his brand new boat, Freedom, which he hadn't even sailed yet, out for the day. So I get to the dock, there's a whole crew waiting for me, and he had left me Freedom, the brand new boat. And Olin Stevens was standing there. So I said, hey, Olin, I guess we're gonna have to go race Dennis and prove that your new boat is faster than your 3-year-old boat. And Olin said, yes, I would really appreciate that if you'd do that. So we sailed out of the harbor, figured out where Dennis was. He was up north of the bridge in Newport. And we didn't say anything to each other. We just lined up. I was to leeward of him on starboard tack, and he was to windward. So we raced, we tuned from under the bridge to the Newport shoreline, over on the left-hand side of the exit going out of Newport. And when I got over close to the rocks, I didn't see Dennis tacking. So I yelled over, room to tack. And he goes, right away, you tack. And here I am in his brand new boat, and he's pushing me against the rocks. So he goes, you tack. So I tack, and he tacks right on my face. So I tack back, and here I am right next to the rocks. And this went on about 10 times in a row. And I said, this is going to be a long summer. So that's how it got started.
Right away with a competitive spirit going.
Oh, yeah. And the summer went pretty much like that. We ran into each other a couple times, but we did a good job. And there was a lot of camaraderie and a lot of competition. And part of the competition with Dennis is who could work the hardest. So we used to fight for whoever could get away from the dock the earliest in the morning. And we would end up getting up at 5 in the morning, run down there with all the guys, get the boat ready, and try to get out before him. Well, what I learned quickly is Dennis doesn't sleep, and if he sleeps, it's only like about 2 hours. And if you ever slept in the same room with him, you could say anything at any time in the middle of the night and he'd have an answer right away. So I don't really know if he does sleep, but anyway, we had good camaraderie, had great racing. We tested a lot of sails. And at the end of the summer, I think it was August, he had to go to the Fastnet race. And so he actually left to go to Europe. And he said, Tom, you've done a good job all summer. I know I told you I wasn't ever going to buy any sails from you. I was just going to buy North and Hood and test those. But you've done a good job. So look at whatever sail you think we're deficient on, build it, charge me, and I'll pay you, and we'll see how it goes. So I never really liked the spinnakers on the boat. So we built a spinnaker. When he came back, we tested the spinnaker. And sure enough, I put it up on the boat I was on, and we beat him. And then he said, okay, let's switch spinnakers. So I took the spinnaker he had, and he took the one I had, and all of a sudden he was beating me. So that was sort of the start of me getting my feet wet in the sailmaking game for the America's Cup.
That was the rap about Saab Stead early on in the 70s. You guys had fast kites. I remember I had a one design boat, and we switched to a Saab Stead kite right off the bat because we thought they were fast kites. What were you doing different, you think, with your kites in those days?
Yeah, I think what we did different was we really paid a lot of attention to the detailing, And we made the sails as flat as they could be, so they projected area, but rounded on the edges so they were quite stable. We made sort of an elliptical style sail. And I think we had a sail designer named Peter Wheeler who did a particularly nice job sort of putting the sails together, paid a lot of attention to it. And, you know, it's like anything in life, attention to detail pays off. So I think that was part of it. And I think, you know, the development we were allowed to have by virtue of Dennis being supportive of us gave us a good opportunity to try sort of low aspect sails. And then Dennis realized that we were building good sails there, and he helped us immeasurably. A good way to get started, and probably my understanding of spinnakers was enhanced through all that. And later we started building jibs and mains and did a pretty good job there. So
I remember in '72, it didn't seem like computers got completely integrated for a little while. Talk to me about what your design platform was and the early evolution in those days of design platforms.
well, I think all the sailmakers would like you to think, Ron, that they had a better computer and a better design platform and a better designer. But the fact of the matter is that on the boat testing was still the best place to learn. But to replicate the sail and to keep it going once you had a good sail, absolutely, you needed a computer or you needed a way to do patterns so you could replicate that sail once you had a good design. So I think that was just the forefront. You know, if you think of 1980, North had been using computer design for quite a while, and you know, quite sophisticated patterns and quite sophisticated cutting machines. They were probably ahead of everybody at that point, but that didn't mean you couldn't build a good sail. And building a good sail, you know, was hard work. You just had to keep working at it, and you had to go out and test it real time. Today's world, if you fast forward, we have analytical programs that allow us to test the sail in the computer. Doesn't mean it's perfect, but it means that it leads you in the right directions. But back then, the design program was really used more to come up with a design and then be able to replicate it.
So the pinnacle four events, the America's Cup, the Vendée Globe, the Volvo Around the World race, and the Olympics. You guys are making sails for all those. Talk to us a little bit about how you met the challenge of building sails with these four completely different platforms, but each of which exemplify great sailing.
When I joined North in 1987, early in the year, I said, hey, it's one thing to build fast America's Cup sails and fast ocean racing sails, but you don't want to just have the reputation for fast sails. You want to also have the reputation for durable sails and ones that can last a long time. And there's no better test bed than around the world racing. And the two events that I think are the highest profile and the ones that we aspire to do well in today are the Vendée Globe, because imagine having to go around the world with a single sail inventory, never being able to change it, single-handed, never stopping, and race for 80 to whatever it is, 100 days. The last one just finished. The winners finished in 80 days. And then, of course, the Volvo race with a also limited sail inventory, but does have stops and does have an entire crew. And they're pushing hard and, you know, beating the sails as hard as you can imagine. And then, of course, the genesis of all of this is small boat sailing. And, you know, that's covered by the Olympics. And we aspire to make as many of the Olympic winners and sails as possible. In fact, we just got the sail order for the One Design 49er, which is very exciting for us as a company. Which one do we learn more in? We learn so much in every one of those venues that, to me, if you want to be the best sailmaker and want to do the best job for your clients, you've got to participate in all four.
Talk to us about the differences between sails that you're going to do for the AC and sails you're going to do for around the world.
If you think about the America's Cup, nothing has really changed except the speeds are much more. We used to try to get, you know, 3/4 of a knot at the most and 1/10 of a knot at the least out of a 12 meter. Obviously now 1/10 of a knot, they're not even thinking about that. They're trying to hang on when they're going 50 knots or 40 knots and a whole new set of issues. They're trying to foil at a low speed and then have really flat shapes and low drag at a high speed. So, but it's all the same. It's trying to make one boat go faster than the other. And anybody that doesn't think that the Aero package on a 12 meter or on a IACC boat or an ACC boat or a catamaran or a foiling AC-75, if you don't think that the sails and the Aero package matter a lot, you're crazy. It matters. And imagine the range that they're trying to sail in right now. They're trying to go from a wind speed of 6.5 knots to whatever it was, 22 knots. Imagine what the sail differences must be between going 10 knots through the water and 50 knots. What we learn there is how to prevent deformation, how to make the best layout so that the sail doesn't deform, and how to make it go from the flattest shape you can imagine, almost 0% camber, to as much camber as you possibly can get, say 15%. So back when we were using a rigid wing, like in the America's Cup in 1988 or the America's Cup in Bermuda, the rigid wing is fantastic because you can go 0 degrees, 0% camber to 20% camber. But how do you do that with a soft sail? Well, this time they did a great job with it because they used internal battens, a twisting mast or a rotating mast that could twist, and a double mainsail. And they figured out how to, particularly Team New Zealand, figured out how to make the sail almost board flat up to almost 15%. So they got almost to the point where it was equal to a rigid wing.
I got to ask about in New Zealand most recently, the 2-layer sails, the inner sail and the outer sail, if you will, the weather and the leeward shape. How much different were the shapes on the leeward side and the weather side of these 2-paneled sails?
So they weren't wildly different. Amazingly, there's a patent from something like 1929, if I remember right, by one of the Herrschaffs on the double sail idea. He actually had a mast drawn with 2 tracks on the back of it, sort of a D-section mast, and double mainsail. I don't think he ever imagined carbon battens in the middle, and the carbon battens are adjustable and do allow you to have a little fuller shape on the leeward side of the mainsail than the windward side. So that provides more like an airplane wing or a rigid sailboat wing, and has made these boats really efficient.
How many battens vertically up on the AC boats in New Zealand most recent America's Cup?
Probably, you can see the boats behind me. They're probably 7, if I remember right, 6 or 7. Don't quote me on that.
And they can they tension the battens independently?
Yes, they can.
So they can change the camber?
Each team went about it a little differently, but they can, yes.
And so they're changing the camber as they're sailing along based upon the wind speed, i.e. an apparent wind across the boat, etc.
Exactly. So what's interesting is you saw a lot of different jib sizes, for instance.
Yes.
That's simply because every knot of wind speed, or every 2 knots of wind speed, they needed a different size jib. And if you think about what the jib was used for, it was used for power when they were trying to foil. It was used for maneuverability around the starts and the tacks. And pretty much the rest of the time it was in the way. You know, it's drag. So you would have seen the jibs try to be fuller when they needed power, but try to make them as flat as possible once they got up to speed.
How many sensors do you think are on those boats right now? That is to say, sensors that they can read, that they're monitoring.
Now, Ron, you know we work with most every team, so I'm not supposed to know anything.
Yes.
But on the other hand, there are a lot of sensors. They're sensing sizes, they're sensing depth, they're sensing wind angle, they're sensing rudder angle, they're sensing the foil fin angle. Yeah, they've got pretty much everything. I mean, you could run the boat easily from inside a container with no guys on board. Obviously, that's not what everybody wants to see. And I'm sure that the crew members wouldn't like that much. But it's like a video game. And they are talking about making video games an Olympic sport. So you never know.
We could be the crossover sport.
Exactly.
Part video game, part of the water. You could be in your front room and have people throw buckets of water in your face as you play with your controller while you're tearing $100 bills.
Exactly. So Ron, I do a little presentation that I call Sailing at the Extreme. I concentrate on the Vendée Globe because I'm in awe of these sailors that sail around the world single-handed. Can't tell you that that's something that I've aspired to do, but I'm in awe of the people that do it. Then, of course, the 36th America's Cup, which ended a month ago, and then a little bit of news from around the sport. So it doesn't cover all the things we've talked about today. Those of you that followed the Vendée Globe, you'll know that there were two winners. One was Apivia, the boat that finished first. And the reason why there were two winners is because there was a first to finish, and then there was a boat that hung back to pick up a sailor whose boat had broken and ended up in a life raft. These boats are spectacular from the point of view that they've got very sophisticated sail handling design because there's only one guy on board, or one girl, I should say. And if you look carefully at this picture, there's a furling sail on the bow, there's a inner sail that you see set, and there's yet another one in between the mast and that. The start of the race, fantastic. I think there was something like 30 on boats. Not all the boats finish, but if you think about how important this sport is to the countries like France and England and Spain and Italy, there's no lack of interest and participation. So the race looks something like this. Remember that they can't stop. They start in Les Sables d'Olonne. They race down through the doldrums. They go west around the St. Helena High. They go around the bottom of Cape Town. The limit along the bottom is the ice, and the race organizers actually put a limit on latitude of how far south you can go. The further south you go, the more wind there is and the shorter distance. But obviously, if there's a limit, you pretty much go close to it. Then you go around Cape Horn, which is a fantastic experience, go up along the shore of South America, back through the doldrums, stay out around the Azore High, and then back into France. You can see that the interest in when the fleet's leaving the harbor, the French love their athletes and their star sailors. Great picture of the boats capable of going speeds of 35 or so. You can see in the foreground, the orange diagonal piece you see pulls one of the foils up. In this case, the windward foil or the port side foil. And if you look closely, they have two head sails up here with one in the middle. And a lot of times they'll actually race with all three out. And the idea is that it's like sailing in a lift to use all the sails. If you look in front, you can see the wide outrigger on the windward side holding the mast up, and you can see the leeward side holding the jib out. Here they are out on the boat in the middle of the ocean. Haven't seen anybody for a number of days, and they're still happy. You can tell these guys just really love it. There are a lot of them finished the 80 to 100 days and wish they could go further. Being a good, true Frenchman, you got to bring a little wine along to enjoy the happy moments. Great picture behind him of the outrigger and also of the foiling centerboard or dagger board on the windward side. So this was the man Kevin Escoffier whose boat broke in half. For those of you that watched the race, that was off of Cape Town, and the boat actually broke in half. Only gave him like a minute or two to get off the boat. He jumped into a life raft with a survival suit and prayed that somebody would come along and find him. Luckily, he radioed. The Vendée Globe race management knew that he was in the water, and they sent the nearest boat, the man on the right, Jean Lecomte, to go save him. And they also diverted a couple other boats in the race to stand by. So Jean Lecomte found him after a really big search, actually found him and lost him at one point. Remember, it's just a life raft in the water. Here are the National Defense coming along, our equivalent of the Coast Guard, that came alongside and picked off Kevin Escoffier and took him back to shore. And Jean Lecomte was able to go on and finish the race very well, by the way. This is Kevin saying, thanks, guys. I really appreciate this, getting picked up out in the middle of the ocean here. Imagine. And the funny story, or the interesting story, is that the man on the right is Kevin, who was in the water. Jean Lecomte in the middle saved him, and the man on the left saved John Lecomte in the last edition. And then, of course, the race results and the ranking, as I explained, Yannick Besthaven won the race, but he stood by when Kevin Escoffier was in the water. Charlie Dallin was first to finish, but with the time that Yannick stood by, he actually ended up winning the race by 3 or so hours. But if you imagine there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 8 boats there that all finished within 80 days. And imagine how close they were after racing so far, 30, whatever it is, 30,000 miles, 80 days, and they're all right next to each other. So anybody that doesn't think that's a competitive sport, wow. Very exciting finish. The Yannick Besthaven actually ends up winning the race. Here he is. And the two of them were great friends back on shore and both had something to brag about. And the first woman, Clarisse Krem, very exciting. Her first around the world, her first Vendée Globe, and I think 31 years old or low 30s, first woman finisher. Here's the boat showing how dry they are out in the ocean. We were proud because we outfitted the top 10 boats, and then on to the America's Cup. And the America's Cup is the exact opposite of what we just looked at, because there is no second, and second in the Vendée Globe is fantastic. Everybody fights for this this cup you see on the right, and lots of prestige and not much money for it. So you get to spend a lot of money, and all you get is really that cup. And if you win, they say it's the golden rule. He who has the gold rules, and you get to pick the venue. And as long as you got a willing challenger, you get to pick the boat and the rules. But that always seems to be up for argument. So one of my favorite cups was with one of your members, and that was with Paul Kayard. And unfortunately, we did a great job getting to the finals, and we actually used one of the other team's boats. But that was the first year that the Kiwis were able to win. And I got to tell you, they did a great job, and they were wonderful competitors, and they beat us handily. Paul Kayard and I weren't proud of it, but we did a good job, and we were proud to represent the U.S. But the Kiwis have had a pretty good reign since then, so hats off to them.
That was 1995 with Peter Blake, then became Sir Peter Blake. Incredible events in San Diego. You were right; they were so powerful through the entire series.
Yeah, the first start, Paul and I did a really nice job beating them at the start, and we started on the starboard end of the line, and they were dead behind us. And we went along on starboard for 5 or 10 minutes, and I said to Paul, "Hey, the bad news is they're a little higher, so maybe we ought to try to go a little higher." At that point, they'd gotten a little higher than us, so they cracked sheets a little bit and started going forward on us. And then eventually they got sort of bow to us, and I looked at Paul and I said, "This is going to be a long series." So we knew we were in trouble then. So a little history on the America's Cup. This was in Australia, which was a fantastic time for the Cup. Everybody thought they had a chance at that point. For the first time, somebody had finally beat the big bad Americans. So 12 challengers showed up, one from your yacht club. And here they are at the start of the World Championships in Fremantle, Australia. In context, that's 1987. You can see that sail design was starting to take on a little different look at that point. And then we went to the IACC boats. This was off San Diego. If you look at the boat in the foreground, Australia, they actually ended up sinking. These boats were built very light, and they were really designed to go upwind, downwind. Sails were continuing to improve. Actually, carbon had come into the fore, but still mostly Kevlar and Mylar and more classic patterns in the sails. And then on to the sort of aberrant series off Valencia with Larry Ellison and Ernesto Bertarelli. They raced a big, long catamaran against a big trimaran. Fantastic sailing, but not so good for the Cup. But you can see at this point, almost all carbon in the sails, and very low stretch, very tough on the gear, because if the gear on the boat wasn't strong, you'd break the boat. The sails had gotten that strong. And moving along, this is something you'll all recognize. I don't know if any of you recognize that bridge, but that's one that's right off your yacht club to the left. And anybody looking out the window, you can probably see it. One of the best amphitheaters for sailboat racing in the world, but this made this cup fantastic. 75 footers screaming along at amazing speeds. First time that they actually figured out how to foil the boats. You'll remember that Emirates New Zealand got up 8-1, and all they had to do was win one more race. And every morning we woke up, they didn't win one more race. And in the end, Oracle figured out how to do it. They employed some of the technology that they had. They changed a few crew members, and they were off to the races. And the sad thing for me is that Larry didn't keep it right in the best amphitheater in the world, because then we moved on to Bermuda. It's a wonderful place to have an America's Cup, but much harder to see. And I think Russell Coutts and Larry always had hoped that they would find a way to make this sport designed to put fans in the stands around the boats so you could see them up close, and then make it a made-for-TV event. But neither of that happened. It was hard to see. They had to keep the boats, the spectator boats, far enough away from the race boats. And I don't think that the boats ever garnered enough TV interest to make it a sellable long-term investment for advertisers or TV producers. As we all know, Emirates Team New Zealand won that time and then brought it to Auckland, where you just saw the result. What a fantastic place to sail. You walk down the street, everybody knows your name. They love their sailors. The city's fantastic. The sailing's fantastic. And everybody loves having them there.
You could even argue that the Kiwis, you and I remember in Perth, Plastic Fantastic was fast as all get out, had an incredible record through the trials, and only lost in the finals against you guys, DC, and then they were gone. And then again in 92 in San Diego, they were fast as all get out until they had to get rid of their bowsprit after Paul successfully protested their bowsprit. So in other words, both of those times they were incredibly impressive. And then they won in 95, and you and I know that even when the Swiss team won in 2003 and 7, they had Kiwi leadership. So one could argue that the Kiwis have been the winningest group since 95. They deserve a real hats off for having real powerful, competitive sailing programs.
Yeah, good point, Ron. We sailors talk about it, believe me, and we're very impressed. And if you drill down into what their success is, it's so many things, but it's culture, it's leadership, it's how to manage. They employed AI this time. They have the best simulator. They apply technology probably better than any of the teams. They're a small team. They're very budget constrained, but they spend their money well. You could argue that many of the teams try to spend too much money in too many different areas. We kid about the Kiwis that they have broad shoulders because they have a chip on both, but it's not the case. The guys that do it are intelligent guys. They work hard, they're serious, but they have fun. It's a great culture.
You and I remember they were the first guys to put a plastic 12-meter in the water. They were in 87 in Perth. In 95, remember they had the bowsprit, so they were pretty innovative there. And they did experiment with a forward foil like you guys did and San Diego did. They've basically been very hardworking and quite innovative at each of the cup moments. And in Bermuda, remember they had a dedicated flight controller paying attention to how to keep the boat out of the water at different speeds. Everybody knows when you water ski, you've got to have a very steep angle to get out of the water. Once you get going, you want the ski to be flat. They had a dedicated flight controller doing that, whereas Jimmy Spittle was trying to do that and steer the boat and so on. So it seems to me that they do deserve all of the accolades we sailors give them, and they've been a quite innovative, technically savvy nation.
Ron, you should come on the road with me and do this presentation with me. The Royal New Zealand Yacht Squadron, because of this last win, is now the second winningest yacht club in the world behind the New York Yacht Club, which that'll be a hard one to beat, but I would never count them out.
I agree.
Yeah, and all the things you say are exactly right. And, Paul got under the skin of the guys in 95. We got under the skin of the guys in 87. You probably remember that.
It was one heck of a press conference.
If you want to hear a funny story, just before the trials, I was driving to the boatyard with Dennis, and I was sent right before the finals when we raced Kiwi Magic.
Yeah.
I said, "Hey, Dennis, these guys are pretty good, and they've only been defeated once, and that was by us."
Yes.
But they're young, and they're probably less experienced than we are, and certainly haven't won and then lost a cup. So I wonder if we could get under their skin a little bit some way. And Dennis was just staring out the window, and I said, "Hey, Dennis, did you hear me?" And he said, "Yeah." And we never really talked about it again. And the next day was the press conference. And I could tell at the press conference he was sort of jittery, and kind of shifting around in his seat. I was sitting next to him.
Yeah.
I think Tom Blackaller was just on the other side. Somebody asked about the boat, about Kiwi Magic. And all of a sudden, before the answer came, Dennis blurted out, "Why would you sail a plastic boat unless you wanted to cheat?" And Tom said, "Oops, I wouldn't have said that." And then looked over to Adam and said, "You didn't say that, I did." So from that day on, Chris Dixon and the team, no, they wouldn't even look at us at the start. They would just keep their eyes forward, and I'm sure we got under their skin, and I'm sure Paul did the same in 95. But in the end, you still got to beat them on the water, and both Paul did that and we did it.
G'day, my name's Glenn Ashby. I am on the sailing team here at Emirates Team New Zealand. The main roles really with the team for the last sort of decade has been sort of sail trimming or aero trimming. We've been through sort of wings and soft sails, and we're now into a twin skin mainsail concept. So over that sort of decade there's been quite a variance. What we're doing now with the twin skin mainsail concept and the structures and how we're pushing things now is extremely challenging, really, really exciting, and we're really pushing boundaries that have never been done before. Is the America's Cup stressful? Yes, it is. It is very much a big pressure cooker for not only, I guess the sailing side of things, but for the rest of the wider team. There's a huge amount of effort and work that goes in behind the scenes that nobody ever gets to see. There's so many departments that are absolutely under the pump at different periods throughout the campaign. Obviously, the design team in the early part gets a pretty big hammering with the concept and getting things initially going. And the sailing team at the end ultimately has the pressure come on and actually getting the finished product around the racetrack in good shape. So definitely a lot of pressure, but that's why we do it. Perfectionism, if you like, with the America's Cup I think it's about the attention to detail in really every department, whether it be electronics, hydraulics, marketing, doesn't matter what department you're in. I think it's just that real level of detail, and leaving no stone unturned is really important. Teamwork, right the way through the whole team here at Emirates Team New Zealand is one of our core values. We very much are a big family, and we all work really, really closely together interdepartmentally to obviously get the best performance out of the boat. As far as teamwork goes, good teamwork generally wins the America's Cup. You're sailing on the boat, you do have the rest of the team, and the rest of the country, if you like, on your shoulders and watching your every move. You can't make mistakes because everybody sees them, and you get judged on those. So for us, it's about just continually refining our own personal development, on board sailing the boat. The physicality of these boats nowadays is pretty immense. One thing that's pretty unseen or unknown is actually how much the boats move around and the G-forces of the boat. On the TV, it doesn't look like they move around very much. It all looks pretty stable, but when you're on board, you're getting flicked around like a bit of a rag doll. Yeah, look, Challenger to Defender is definitely a different program. It's almost easier in some ways to be a Challenger because you're just worrying about yourself. And in actual fact, you are still very much a Challenger as you go into the America's Cup. So we've very much taken on the approach that we're challenging ourselves. And at the end of the day, if you put your Defender hat on, you're probably not pushing things hard enough. The development, I have been absolutely surprised with how how fast the boats have actually ended up. Initially, we sort of had some numbers of what we thought the boats were capable of doing. You sort of had some dreams of possibly what the boats could do, but when those dreams, I guess, become reality before you even get to the America's Cup of some of the performance numbers that you're doing, you're like, wow, where's this going to end? And we are just getting faster and faster, and the boat's performance is getting better and better. And when the boat's performance gets better, it opens up more doors and avenues of opportunity of what manoeuvres are achievable and what modes are achievable and what racing scenarios are achievable against an opponent. So it's just a huge learning experience at the moment, and I think we're really, again, probably just scratching the surface of where these boats could get to.
So the most famous photo from the event was the American Magic team. They tried a very hard maneuver. I'm sure all of you saw it at some point. They tried to do a tack bear away in a lot of breeze and probably weren't quite ready for everything that happened, or weren't. Fell on their side, and the boat, got a hole in the side, mostly by the impact with the water. Remember that the skin of the boat doesn't have that much loading on it unless it does hit the water or hits some immovable object. So they between the framework, they knocked out about a perfect rectangle. The boat immediately filled up with water, and everybody knows that they barely saved it. Thank God for the other teams. You'll see the other teams out here actually helping them. Team New Zealand particularly gave them all the resources and helped them, actually gave them boat builders to help them get back in the race. So good sportsmanship there. Great picture of Ben Ainsley's team. So Ben Ainsley's team probably sailed the early part of the trials, not the Christmas Cup, but the early part of the trials better than anybody else. I think they won every race. But they knew from the beginning they had a bit of a speed issue. I think one of the problems was that they had a bustle down the middle of the boat that wasn't very hydrodynamically efficient. It prevented them from getting up on the foil as easily as they would have liked, and probably gave them more drag once they were up on it. Great picture of the boats, a little bit of a luff going on here, so not full power. Again, we look at the sail plan as the Aero package. You've probably heard me refer to it as the engine above the deck. So there are pretty much two things that allow for the boats to go the speeds they do, and that is the aerodynamic package and then the hydrodynamic package. And obviously these boats have figured out a way to apply the most power when they need it, have the least power when they don't need it that they can possibly have, and then have the foils be as small and as little surface as possible, but still able to allow them to foil. So an ideal situation would be you'd have a big foil that you wouldn't have to angle a lot to get up out of the water, and then you could change to a really small foil. Well, obviously they can't do that, so they've got to figure out a way to angle it with the smallest foil and apply the most power they can with the sail plan. And he who did that the best was the winner, and that was Team New Zealand. So again, the package that they were looking for had power and depowered in a condition like this. You'll see Prada's jib right there. They're going along wishing that that jib was flatter in this picture. If it was flatter, they wouldn't have been able to power it up enough to get up out of the water in the first place. Very much an entire Aero challenge that we think about and we try to design around to make it the most efficient.
Tom, this shot shows the British bustle underneath their boat. Could you talk a little bit about what you think they might have been thinking about there? What do you think?
Yeah, so if they had that to do again, I think they would have had a bustle more like Prada's. And what turned out to be the better bustle, and I'll explain why the bustle is important in a second, but the flat, I think their thinking was, and I don't know this for sure, but I think their thinking was that the boat would get up on that in the sort of marginal foiling condition and get it up to the point where the foil started working quickly. They never really made that work. So not only was it drag when they were down in the water, but it was also aerodynamic drag when they were up out of the water. But the reason the bustle is important is because you have very little lateral resistance when the boat's in the water. So if the wind is hitting the sails and pushing it sideways, then they're losing ability to get up on the foil. So the bustle acts a little bit like a keel in the marginal foiling conditions. Secondarily, it makes the boat stiffer. So it's like a big I-beam that makes the boat stiffer and gives you better headstay and backstay tension. And the third thing is that if you can close down the end plate with the water, if you look at Prada, they're flying about a foot above the water. Ideally, they would be flying 6 inches above the water. And then you get this end plate from the bustle. And if you look at the mainsails, they were right down on the deck.
Right.
And then the bustle itself is closing the gap between the windward side and the leeward side for the end plate on the water.
Sending the wind aft, for all those who are wondering why you care about end plate. You care about end plate because it captures the leakage underneath the sail or underneath the boat in this case.
Exactly. Good picture of the boat's tacking. Prada had very good maneuverability. They had a high and slow gear that they made work better than the other teams. But ultimately, I think the speed of Team New Zealand was just too much. Great picture from above. You can see how flat they're able to make the sails once they're up on the foils. The Luna Rossa guys won the trials, went on to sail in the Cup against Emirates Team New Zealand. I love this picture. It just shows the boats at full chat. Very impressive that the 2 final boats were the boats that were involved with sort of developing the rule and early on, one being the challenger of record, Luna Rossa, and the other being the defender, Team New Zealand. I don't know if any of you seen a boat called the Escape, but it was a boat that was designed 20 years ago, but it kind of looked like that. But the key design elements, very clean boat, bustle designed to be almost down on the water. As I said, there's sort of a tunnel down the center of the boat, and they actually had the sails down in that tunnel, which, you know, you could say maybe wasn't the most efficient, but it was much better for the crew work. You get a picture of the battens there, both in the jib and the mainsail.
So the Aero packages, when you guys are building, are you building the Aero as part of the sail?
We bill it as everything above the deck, so we call it the engine above the deck. Mm-hmm. So we model the mast and the sail and the rigging together, and because every one of them is somewhat interactive. The shape of the main is dictated very much by the shape of the battens and the mast, so we have to model all that. The jib being in front of the main changes the airflow of the mainsail. Without getting too technical, it does. And then, of course, the rigging is there, whether we like it or not. We'd love for it not to be there, but you know, it's drag and whatever. So we do what we can to make that the lowest windage and the least stretch possible. I don't know if you all know this, but the rigging is a bundle of monofilament carbon. On some of the sophisticated ocean race boats, we've made it into an airfoil. So it's pretty sophisticated stuff. Everything you see there is carbon. The only other thing that's kind of exciting to us in the world of sailing is that there are boats called the All Tims. There's 2 boats that just tried to go around the world, fully crewed, setting the speed record around the world. These boats are so sophisticated and so fast. They spend the entire time going around the world, basically trying to slow the boat down so it doesn't break. The speed that these boats are, the potential of what they can do, again, they were on pace to break the record. They probably would have done it around 40 days, which is incredible. Here's a great picture of one going full chat. And then, of course, if you look at a picture like this, you say, who really wants to do this? But on the other hand, it's fun for us as a company because we learn how to build these big sails and how to make them light, how to make them strong for these ocean conditions. And again, we look at the rig and the sail together.
Thank you so much, Tom. I have a few questions about your technology group. So give us the organization of it. Sales, one part, Southern Spars is another part. Talk to us about that umbrella organization, please.
So when I first had the idea that it wasn't just me, Terry Kohler very much had the idea where we would think about the entire Aero package as the engine. We decided then and there that for us to control the Aero package, we were just one component of it as sailmakers. So we realized we needed a mast company. And we got involved with Tom Omohundro, moved that on to acquiring a couple and later became Southern Spars. And the idea was that we would work together to come up with better sort of aerodynamic conclusions for issues that we saw in the highest profile events. So the companies are separate, but they're together. Our modeling tools work well together. It just so happens North has a modeling tool for sailmaking that works well for boat design and rig design. And we also have a package that does a nice job that not only looks at loading, but looks at the aerodynamic aspects of side loading and side force and the things that we think are important to make a sailboat go fast. In that quest for trying to do the best job possible by looking at it all together, we sort of developed into being a mast company, a sailmaking company, and a rigging company. As I said, we all work together, but if Quantum or Doyle Sales came to us and wanted a mast, we very much work with them and we help them develop on their behalf and work with a lot of teams. But typically, the best result is putting them all together. So they're all independent. They're all run with different CEOs or general managers. They answer to the group, to your question about what North Technology is. We're more than a holding company, but basically we're the umbrella company that looks over the overarching goal of trying to come up with the best aero packages.
When you are working on the aero package on a fast round the world boat or an AC boat, are there different aerodynamicists who are working inside the team whose job is now specialized to be the aero package guys? I remember in Valencia, there were lots of evolution at the latter part of the cup on the aero packages when we really got down to racing. So talk a little bit about the specialization of the aero factor inside of a sail design and overall design team.
Well, so that sort of leads me to a slightly, it makes me digress for just a sec, and then I'll answer your question. What's great about working with these teams is that you work with really smart people that you weren't aware of otherwise. And one thing I've learned is if a guy that works for a team or even a sailor that's on a team, if they say something, it's probably right. And if you take the attitude that you know better internally, some people call it NIH, not invented here. So we as a company have very much embraced ideas from outside the box. Our two biggest technologies that we have employed in sailmaking are 3DL and then 3DI. We bought both of those from the outside. They couldn't have been developed probably on the outside. So bringing them in-house, we were the ones that developed it, but the ideas were bought from the outside. So to answer your question, our success has been really very much from working with these people and working with these teams and having a complete desire to interface with them and learn from them at the same time they're learning from us. And this interaction or iterative process is, I think, what makes us different from everybody else. And, it's worked out great. It's like my son introduces me to his friends and he says, my dad did okay for a guy with a full-time summer job. So I don't know if he's disparaging me or jealous, but we have a good laugh about it.
Thanks very much for being our guest on the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon. Truly been a pleasure.
Ron, it's my honor, and I hope nobody fell asleep.
Good on you, mate.
This has been a presentation of the Wednesday Yachting Luncheon.